Elliot Ward moved quietly through the long corridors of the space station. His boots made soft thuds against the metal floor, and the lights above hummed faintly, casting shadows that stretched like thin fingers. He had walked these halls 1,000 times before, but no one really noticed him. Humans were rare on this station, and most dragons thought them too small, too weak, too fragile to matter. Elliot had learned long ago not to argue or explain himself. He stayed out of the way, fixing what needed fixing, cleaning what was dirty, and avoiding anyone who looked important. He carried a small toolbox in one hand, the metal edges worn smooth from years of use. Today his supervisor had given him a simple task: inspect and repair the old nursery wing. No one went there anymore. It was dusty, forgotten, and full of broken toys. The dragons did not care about the nursery. They had plenty of resources, plenty of younglings, and plenty of caretakers. But someone had to do the work, and that someone was Elliot. When he pushed open the nursery door, a faint smell of burnt wood and dry feathers met him. The room was dimly lit, but he could see the toys scattered across the floor. Tiny mechanical animals, cracked blocks, and splintered wooden dragons lay abandoned. Some of the toys were small enough to fit in a human hand, others as large as a dragon hatchling. Elliot knelt down and began picking them up one by one, examining each carefully. As he worked, he heard a soft, trembling sound behind him. He froze, unsure what it was. The space station was supposed to be empty. Slowly he turned around, and there it was, a small dragon hatchling. Its scales were pale blue, almost translucent in the dim light, and its eyes were wide, round, and wary. The hatchling made a tiny whimpering sound, as if unsure whether Elliot was friend or foe. Elliot froze for a moment. He had seen dragon eggs before, and he had heard stories of hatchlings, but this was the first time he had ever met one in person. His heart beat faster, not with fear but with curiosity. The hatchling's wings were too small to lift it, and it shivered slightly as it watched him. Its tail curled nervously around its feet. It looked so fragile, so helpless, that Elliot felt an unfamiliar pull in his chest. "Hey there," he said softly, keeping his voice calm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The hatchling tilted its head, eyes blinking slowly. It didn't move, but Elliot could feel it studying him, trying to understand. He smiled gently and set his toolbox down. He reached for a small wooden block lying nearby, the corner cracked and splintered. With careful hands he glued the pieces together, smoothing out the rough edges. The hatchling's eyes followed every movement, almost as if it understood that Elliot was trying to help. Hours passed in quiet work. Elliot repaired blocks, fixed tiny mechanical animals, and even reattached a small wheel to a toy cart. Every time he set a finished toy on the floor, the hatchling would inch closer, sniffing it, tapping it with a tiny claw, then retreating again. Elliot didn't mind. He worked slowly and carefully, enjoying the rhythm of fixing things. He did not realize that someone, or something, was watching him from the shadows. By evening, the hatchling had grown slightly bolder. It crept closer and finally touched one of the repaired toys with a delicate claw. Elliot noticed and smiled. "Good," he said quietly. "You like that one, huh?" The hatchling let out a tiny, excited chirp, and Elliot laughed softly. It was a strange, happy sound, one that felt almost like music in the quiet nursery. He realized that this small creature, so fragile and alone, had started to trust him. He didn't know its name and he didn't know its importance. To him it was just a little dragon who needed help. That was enough. Days turned into weeks. Elliot returned to the nursery whenever he could. He fixed toys, cleaned the floor, and even made small games for the hatchling to play. He taught it how to roll a tiny ball, how to stack blocks, and how to move a small toy cart across the room without tipping it over. The hatchling learned quickly, not just from watching, but from copying Elliot's patience, his careful movements, and the way he never raised his voice. The dragons on the station ignored him. They were busy with politics, with training, and with the endless duties of their empire. They did not see the human who quietly worked in the nursery, nor did they notice the bond forming between him and the hatchling. Even the guards who passed by paid him no attention. To them he was just a human, small and unimportant, someone who could not possibly change anything. One night as Elliot was finishing his work, he paused and looked around the nursery. The room was brighter than it had been in years. The toys were repaired, the floor was clean, and the hatchling was curled up in the corner, asleep with one tiny claw on a wooden dragon. Elliot felt a strange warmth in his chest. He did not know why, but he felt proud. He had done something that mattered even if no one else would ever notice. As he packed up his tools to leave, a shadow moved in the corner of his vision. He turned quickly, expecting a dragon or a guard. But there was nothing there. Only the hatchling stirred slightly in its sleep, breathing softly. Elliot shook his head and smiled. I guess some things just wait to be noticed, he whispered. He walked back through the long corridors of the station, feeling smaller than the dragons, smaller than the Empire, but somehow stronger than he had ever felt before. He did not know it yet, but the little dragon he had helped would one day rule all the dragons on the station, and that simple act of kindness would echo through the halls of power for generations. Elliot returned to his small quarters that night, tired but content. He laid down on his narrow bed and thought about the hatchling, about the toys, and about the quiet joy of fixing something broken. Outside, the lights of the station glimmered like distant stars, and somewhere hidden in the shadows, a pair of small eyes watched him with a trust he did not yet fully understand. For Elliot, it was just another quiet night in a station full of dragons who did not care about humans. But for the hatchling, it was the beginning of everything. A small bond had formed, a lesson had been learned, and a life had been quietly shaped without anyone noticing. And in the silence of the nursery, where broken toys became whole again, a future ruler was learning what it meant to care, to trust, and to grow. Elliot did not know the importance of his actions. He only knew that he had helped. And sometimes, in the vast emptiness of space, that was enough. Elliot returned to the nursery the next day just as he had the day before. The hallway felt colder than usual, and the hum of the space station echoed faintly in the distance. He carried his toolbox again, though it felt lighter now, almost like it had a purpose beyond tools and repairs. The hatchling was already there, perched on a small pile of repaired blocks, its eyes bright and alert. The hatchling chirped softly when it saw him. Its tiny wings twitched and it tried to imitate Elliot's movements, picking up a small wooden block with a claw. Elliot smiled, kneeling down beside it. Good job, he said, his voice gentle. You're learning fast. Over the next few hours, Elliot taught the hatchling more than just how to play with toys. He showed it how to balance the blocks carefully, how to roll a small ball without letting it fall, and even how to nudge the tiny cart across the floor without tipping it. The hatchling watched him carefully, tilting its head as it copied every motion. Elliot noticed how quickly it learned and how eager it was to try again if it failed. You're clever, Elliot said quietly, brushing dust off the hatchling's soft scales. You just need patience. The hatchling chirped and nudged one of the repaired toys toward him. It was a small gesture, but Elliot understood. It wanted him to see the result of its effort, to share the small victory. He picked it up and examined it carefully, nodding with approval. That's perfect, he said. See? You did it yourself. Days passed and their routine continued. Elliot found himself looking forward to the time in the nursery. He would finish his work elsewhere on the station, then hurry back during his breaks. He fixed toys, made small improvements, and even created little games for the hatchling. He used spare pieces from old equipment to build tiny mazes and simple puzzles. The hatchling learned to navigate them, learning problem-solving skills without even realizing it. The hatchling began to show signs of curiosity beyond play. It watched Elliot closely when he repaired other things in the nursery, following the movements of his hands, the careful alignment of pieces, and the soft words he muttered. Elliot realized that it was learning more than just games, it was learning observation, patience, and focus. These were small lessons, invisible to most of the station's residents, but they were shaping the hatchling's mind. One afternoon, Elliot noticed a faint glimmer from the corner of the nursery. He looked up and saw a small drone hovering, its cameras pointed toward the hatchling. A sudden chill ran down his spine. The station was full of observers, but he had never expected to be watched here. He realized that the hatchling was important, that someone, or something, wanted to know what he was doing. The hatchling seemed unaware of the attention. It chirped happily and nudged a toy toward Elliot, oblivious to the drone. Elliot shook his head, smiling. I guess you're famous already, he whispered. But you don't care, do you? Despite the unseen audience, Elliot continued his work. He didn't stop and the hatchling didn't either. Each day it grew more confident. It learned to stack blocks taller, to roll balls more accurately, and to push the cart across the room in a straight line. Elliot cheered quietly for each small success, though he knew no one else would notice. The hatchling's trust in him grew as well. It began to follow his hands as he worked, brushing against his arm when it wanted attention. Sometimes, it would rest its small head against his knee, chirping softly in a sound that almost resembled a laugh. Elliot felt a warmth he hadn't expected. He was not just repairing toys, he was shaping a life, and that life was beginning to rely on him in ways he didn't fully understand. As the days turned into weeks, Elliot realized something extraordinary. The hatchling, despite its small size, was learning to understand consequences. If a block tower fell, it tried again more carefully. If the cart tipped, It adjusted its movements. It wasn't just mimicking, it was thinking, planning, and trying. Elliot marveled at its intelligence, quietly proud of the progress they were making together. No one else on the station seemed to notice. The other dragons were busy with training, politics, or study. They ignored the small human and the tiny hatchling, dismissing them as unimportant. Guards passed the nursery without a second glance, and the council continued their endless debates, unaware that one of their future leaders was learning important lessons from a human janitor. One evening, as Elliot prepared to leave, he paused to watch the hatchling. It was sitting on a small pile of blocks that had stacked itself, looking around the nursery with wide, curious eyes. For the first time, it looked as if it was thinking about the world beyond the walls, imagining possibilities it had never known. Elliot felt a pang of wonder. This little creature, so small and weak, had the potential to change everything. He bent down and whispered, "You'll be strong one day. Not just in power but in mind. Remember this, okay?" The hatchling chirped softly in response as if it understood every word. Elliot smiled, feeling a connection that went beyond species, beyond status, beyond anything he had known before. As he walked back through the long, empty corridors of the station, he realized that the small kindness he had shown, fixing toys, teaching patience, sharing time, was creating something far greater than he had imagined. He did not know the hatchling's future, and he did not know the role it would play in the Empire. All he knew was that, for now, they were learning from each other, growing together in a place where no one else seemed to care. In the quiet of his quarters that night, Elliot thought about the hatchling and the lessons of the day. Small kindnesses, he realized, could grow into something much larger. He had fixed broken toys, and in doing so he had repaired something more important. A trust, a connection, a mind ready to learn. Somewhere in the station, unseen eyes continued to watch, but Elliot did not worry. He was not doing this for fame or recognition. He was doing it because it mattered. And in the nursery, where broken toys were slowly becoming whole again, the hatchling dreamed of games, puzzles, and the human who had shown it patience and care. Unseen and unnoticed by the rest of the Empire, a bond was forming that would shape the future in ways no one could yet imagine. For Elliot, it was just another day, another set of repairs, another simple act of kindness. For the hatchling, it was the beginning of something extraordinary. And in the quiet, empty halls of the space station, the smallest actions were quietly laying the foundation for a future that could change everything. Elliot walked through the nursery carrying a basket of repaired toys. The hatchling, now slightly larger, followed him with its small wings flapping excitedly. It chirped and nudged a wooden dragon toward him, eager to show its approval. Elliot smiled and ruffled its tiny head. He had grown used to the quiet companionship. No one else on the station noticed them, and he liked it that way. But today was different. A warning light blinked faintly on the wall, red and urgent. He didn't know why at first, but the sound of approaching footsteps made him tense. A team of security drones entered the room, their scanners sweeping the nursery with bright beams. The hatchling froze, huddling near the pile of blocks. Elliot's heart raced. "Human identified. Unauthorized activity near restricted zone," a robotic voice announced. Elliot swallowed hard. "I'm just repairing the toys," he said quietly, though he knew the machines could not understand tone or intent. The drones hesitated for a moment, and then a group of guards arrived. They were dragons, tall and imposing, with scales that shimmered in shades of silver and green. Elliot felt tiny under their gaze, his toolbox clutched tightly in his hands. "Step aside, human," one of them said in a deep, commanding voice. "You have been in the nursery too long. What are you doing here?" Elliot tried to explain, but his words seemed small and meaningless. I'm just fixing broken toys. I wasn't trying to." Before he could finish, a soft chirp interrupted him. The hatchling had stepped forward. Its wings spread slightly and it raised its head high. Elliot felt a strange weight in the air. The small creature, barely larger than a cat, held itself with a presence far beyond its size. One of the guards gasped. It's the air." Elliot froze. He didn't understand. "Air? What do you mean?" The hatchling looked at him with wide eyes, chirping softly. Then it let out a small roar, not loud or destructive, but full of authority. Its voice echoed in the nursery in a way that felt impossible for such a small body. The guards stepped back, suddenly aware of the presence they had ignored for so long. "This is Orin," one of the elder dragons said, stepping forward from the shadows. "The last heir of the dragon throne. Hidden for protection. And you have been teaching it." Elliot's heart pounded. He had no idea. The little dragon he had spent weeks repairing toys for, teaching simple games, and sharing quiet moments with, was the future ruler of the entire dragon empire. He felt both fear and awe. I didn't know, Elliot said, shaking his head. I was just helping. I didn't even know its name. Orin chirped again, nudging a block toward Elliot as if to reassure him. The guards and elders watched in silence, astonished at the trust between the human and the hatchling. Orin's eyes followed Elliot's every movement, calm and steady, showing no fear despite the large dragons surrounding them. The head elder, a massive dragon with golden scales, stepped closer. It seems this human has shaped the mind of our heir. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. Even without knowing, he has given it lessons in patience, kindness, and understanding. Qualities rare in our kind. Elliot felt his legs shake. He had never thought of himself as important. He was a simple maintenance worker, a human too small to matter. And yet, somehow he had made a difference. Orin chirped again, looking at him with wide, trusting eyes. Elliot knelt down, and the hatchling climbed gently onto his shoulder. The human held it close, feeling the warmth of its small body. You are not in trouble, the elder said, his voice softer now. But understand this, the lessons you have taught it will shape the empire. We did not see this coming. We did not anticipate it. And now, it is too late to undo what has been done. Elliot's mind spun. Too late, he asked quietly. Yes, the elder said. The future of our empire has already been influenced. By you. By your small acts of kindness. Elliot looked down at Orin, who chirped and nuzzled him gently. He realized that the bond he had formed was more than friendship. It was guidance, shaping a mind that would one day make decisions affecting millions. The weight of that thought was heavy, but it did not frighten him. Somehow it made him feel proud. The other dragon stepped back, watching carefully as Orin explored the nursery with quiet confidence. The little dragon's curiosity, patience, and careful movements showed more wisdom than many fully grown rulers. Elliot realized that the games and repairs, the hours spent teaching patience and problem-solving, had prepared the hatchling in ways no one else had imagined. You've done more than you know, the elder said softly, placing a claw on Elliot's shoulder. You have shaped a leader. Not by power or by fire, but by example, by care, and by quiet patience. That is a gift beyond measure. Elliot's chest tightened. He had never thought of himself as a teacher or a guide. He was just a human who fixed broken toys. And yet, here he was, realizing that simple kindness had the power to change the course of an empire. Orin chirped again as if agreeing with the elder. The small dragon looked up at Elliot with bright eyes full of trust. In that moment he understood something important. The future was not always made by those in power. Sometimes it was shaped by small actions, unnoticed and unseen, performed in quiet corners where no one else looked. Elliot took a deep breath and smiled. He had been afraid of being caught, afraid of being punished, but now he understood. What he had done mattered. And the little dragon he had cared for would grow to carry that lesson into the future, into a world far larger than either of them could imagine. As the guards and elders watched in awe, Elliot gently placed Orin back on the floor. The hatchling chirped and nudged a repaired toy toward him, just as it had done from the beginning. It was a small gesture, but Elliot knew it carried a weight far beyond anything else on the station. He realized that sometimes the most important work was quiet, unseen, and done without expectation. And sometimes, it was too late for the world to notice until the results were already changing everything. And so, in the forgotten nursery of a vast space station, a human and a hatchling shared a moment that no one else would forget, not because of grandeur or power but because of trust, patience, and the small acts of care that had shaped a ruler before anyone knew it was possible. Elliot left the nursery that day with a strange feeling of awe. He had been a quiet human no one noticed. Now he understood that even the smallest actions could echo through the halls of power, shaping the future in ways no one could foresee. And somewhere, small eyes watched him, full of trust, ready to carry those lessons into a world that was waiting for change. Time passed quickly on the space station. Elliot still worked in maintenance, but his visits to the nursery became less frequent. He had repaired all the old toys and taught Orin as much as he could with games and puzzles. Now the hatchling was growing faster than he expected. Its wings were longer, its scales thicker, and its eyes held a quiet intelligence that made Elliot pause sometimes, almost afraid of how much it understood. Orin no longer needed constant guidance, but it remembered every lesson Elliot had taught. The small acts of patience, the careful handling of broken toys, and the simple games had shaped more than just play. They had shaped thinking. The hatchling now considered consequences before acting. If a block tower fell, it tried again carefully. If it wanted a toy, it would wait its turn instead of grabbing it. These small behaviors seemed ordinary, but for dragons such patience was unusual. Most relied on power and instinct alone. Elliot watched from a distance as Orin learned more complex skills. He noticed how it watched other dragons interact and how it mirrored their strategies in subtle ways. It could play a game without rushing, plan moves, and even recognize patterns in small ways that impressed the station's other observers. The small dragon was becoming a leader in miniature, learning without being told and understanding without force. The elders began to take note. Orin was growing into something rare, something different from previous heirs. One of the council members, a silver-scaled dragon named the Rose, approached Elliot quietly. "You have taught it more than any of us could," the Rose said, his voice low and careful. "Even without realizing it, your lessons guide its choices." Elliot shook his head. "I only fix toys," he said. "I didn't teach it anything about ruling." The Rose tilted his head, looking thoughtful. "Leadership is not learned through orders. It is learned through example, through patience, care, and understanding. You have given it these things without realizing. That is why it is different." Elliot felt a strange pride. He had never thought of himself as a teacher. He was a simple human, small and quiet, but his actions had lasting consequences. Every toy fixed, every puzzle solved with Orin, had built a mind capable of making choices others could not imagine. Orin began exploring areas of the station beyond the nursery. It watched the adult dragons during training sessions, noting their tactics, their patience, and their mistakes. When it returned to Elliot, it would imitate his calm demeanor, not the aggressive displays the adults used. Elliot noticed the contrast. Where dragons reacted quickly, sometimes harshly, Orin thought carefully before moving. The lessons of patience and careful handling, learned from broken toys and quiet games, were shaping its decisions in ways the Empire could not yet see. One afternoon, Elliot saw Orin watching a dispute between two older dragons over a training exercise. Normally, such disputes would end in loud displays of fire or dominance. But Orin stepped forward, softly chirping, and nudged one of the combatants with a gentle gesture. Both dragons froze, confused by the small, calm presence. Slowly they stepped back and reconsidered, resolving the disagreement without fire or anger. Elliot's heart lifted. The little dragon had learned negotiation not from words but from example, his example. Elliot realized that leadership was not about size or strength. It was about understanding, patience, and respect. By fixing toys, by giving time and attention, he had given Orin the tools to think beyond instinct. The hatchling was learning to guide, to influence, and to resolve without relying on fear or power. These were lessons the Empire had not taught, and yet they were becoming second nature to Orin. As weeks turned into months, Orin's confidence grew. It tested its wings in larger spaces, learning balance and precision. It observed the council, noting strategies, listening to discussions, and silently learning the responsibilities that came with ruling. Elliot watched it with quiet pride, knowing that the foundation of this ruler's mind was built on small, simple lessons, the kind that no one else had bothered to give. One night, Elliot returned to the nursery to find Orin perched on a repaired block tower, looking out over the station's halls. Its eyes were thoughtful, almost human in their depth. Elliot knelt down beside it and whispered, "You're ready for more than games now. You've learned well." Orin chirped softly, brushing its head against him, and Elliot understood. The lessons were no longer his alone. They had become part of the dragon, shaping decisions that would one day influence an empire. The quiet patience, the careful thought, and the empathy that he had shown without expecting anything in return were now instincts in a future ruler. The elders occasionally came to observe, still amazed at Orin's unusual behavior. "It does not rush," one remarked. "It thinks before acting. It listens, it learns, it adapts. Never have we seen this before." Elliot smiled quietly, knowing the secret. None of them had taught it this way. It had learned from a human who repaired broken things and offered time without expectation. And that human, small and unnoticed, had given the hatchling a gift far greater than toys, the gift of thought, of patience, and of quiet power. Eventually, Orin began to take initiative. It organized the small nursery games, leading other hatchlings in play. It solved problems, mediated disagreements, and helped others without asserting dominance. Elliot watched in awe, realizing that the traits he had nurtured in a small, fragile dragon were now extending beyond their quiet room. He understood then what he had never thought possible, that even a small human could shape a future leader. Even unnoticed, simple acts of kindness could echo through time. Orin was no longer just a hatchling. It was a mind prepared for responsibility, a future ruler learning the value of patience, care, and understanding. As he packed his tools to leave that night, Elliot looked at Orin perched atop the block tower, its wings stretching slightly as it observed the station. He felt a quiet certainty that the lessons of broken toys and gentle guidance would carry far beyond the nursery. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the dragon's future was brighter because of small, unnoticed acts of kindness. And for the first time, Elliot felt that being a quiet human in a vast empire could matter more than anyone ever imagined. The small hatchling, shaped by patience and care, was becoming a leader the empire had never expected. A ruler ready to carry lessons of understanding, empathy, and thought into a world that might finally notice the value of even the smallest beings. Years had passed since Elliot first met the tiny hatchling in the forgotten nursery. The station had changed and so had Orin. The small dragon that had once depended on him for toys and games had grown into a confident, thoughtful, and wise leader. Its scales shimmered with strength, its wings spanned wide, and its eyes held the intelligence and patience that Elliot had quietly nurtured. The day had come for Orin to assume the throne of the Dragon Empire. The council gathered, dragons from all corners of the station watching silently, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Elliot stood at the edge of the hall, unnoticed by most but not by Orin. The little dragon had grown into a ruler who remembered every lesson, every game, every moment of trust shared in the quiet nursery. When Orin stepped forward, the hall fell silent. The dragon heir did not roar or demand obedience. Instead, it moved with calm authority. Its gaze swept across the council, across the gathered dragons, and finally settled on Elliot. Orin chirped softly, almost like a greeting, and Elliot felt his chest tighten. He realized in that moment that the bond they had formed years ago had not been forgotten. It had shaped everything. The elders whispered among themselves, astonished by the quiet confidence of the new ruler. Orin did not speak with fire or power. It spoke with actions, gestures, and presence. Even the strongest dragons in the room felt the weight of its gaze, and they knew instinctively that this ruler would lead not through fear, but through understanding. After the ceremony, Orin turned to Elliot and nudged him gently with a claw. The gesture was small but full of meaning. It was an acknowledgement, a silent thank you for the time, patience, and care that had shaped its mind. Elliot knelt down, feeling the warmth and strength of the dragon on his shoulder. You helped me grow," Orin chirped softly, a sound full of trust and respect. "You taught me patience, care, and thinking before acting. I will never forget it." Elliot's eyes filled with tears. He had never imagined that a simple human like him could have such an influence. He had only fixed broken toys, shared small games, and given time and attention without expecting anything in return. Yet those small acts had created a leader who could guide an empire with wisdom instead of fear. The council members approached cautiously, still unsure how to respond to a ruler so unlike any before. Orin simply stepped forward, gesturing toward Elliot. "This human," it chirped, "has shown me what it means to care, to be patient, and to act with thought. These lessons will guide my rule. We will remember them, and so will the Empire." The words were not loud, but they carried across the hall. Dragons who had long relied on displays of power felt something shift. They realized that strength alone did not make a good ruler. Compassion, patience, and understanding mattered just as much, and the Empire would be different because of it. Elliot stayed by Orin's side as the new ruler addressed the council. Orin spoke of cooperation, of learning from mistakes, of listening to others, and of valuing even the smallest beings. The dragons murmured among themselves, surprised by the wisdom coming from such a young leader. Elliot watched silently, realizing that he had never done this to gain recognition. He had acted simply out of kindness. And now, kindness had changed the course of history. After the ceremony, Orin led Elliot to a quiet chamber in the station. The room was filled with light, and Orin perched atop a large chair, looking more like a guardian than a ruler. "You will not leave," Orin chirped gently. "I need your guidance, even if only for small things. You have taught me that even small actions matter." Elliot shook his head, smiling. "I am no teacher," he said softly. "I only help. You learned yourself. I only fixed broken things." Orin's gaze was steady. "What you fixed was more than toys," it said. "You fixed understanding, trust, and patience. You shaped me without knowing it. And that is something the Empire will never forget." Word of Orin's leadership spread across the station. Dragons from distant halls, species from other sectors, and even humans began to notice the change. Disputes were resolved calmly, decisions were made with thought and care, and the Empire slowly became a place where cooperation mattered as much as strength. Everywhere, the influence of one small human was quietly felt. Elliot returned to his maintenance work, still humble, still quiet, but now with a sense of pride he had never felt before. He fixed broken equipment, repaired tools, and occasionally visited Orin, who welcomed him warmly each time. He realized that even in a vast empire, one person's actions could echo far beyond their expectations. One evening, Elliot watched Orin from a balcony high above the station. The dragon surveyed the halls, calm and thoughtful, not with aggression but with understanding. Elliot smiled. The lessons of patience, care, and small kindnesses had become instincts in the ruler. The empire had changed, and it had started in a quiet nursery with broken toys and a human who cared. Orin's eyes met Elliot's for a moment, and in that glance, Elliot saw the trust, respect, and wisdom he had helped build. He knew the empire would remember the teachings, even if no one else ever knew the details. Small kindnesses, patience, and quiet care had created a future ruler, and that future would shape generations. The hatchling turned emperor chirped softly, then spread its wings, gliding gracefully across the chamber. The dragons who had gathered watched in awe, realizing that leadership did not always roar, did not always command. Sometimes, it grew quietly through trust, patience, and the example of someone who had been unnoticed. Elliot stood at the edge of the balcony, feeling the wind from the station's artificial currents. He thought of the first day he had entered the nursery, of broken toys and tiny claws. He had not known then that this small dragon would one day rule the empire, or that his simple acts of care would leave a mark that no power could erase. And in the heart of the empire, Orin ruled wisely, remembered the lessons of a human who fixed broken things, and ensured that patience, kindness, and thoughtfulness would guide every decision. Elliot realized then what he had known all along. Even the smallest actions, unnoticed by most, could shape the future in ways the world would never forget. And in that realization he felt content. A quiet human had made a difference, and the empire had learned to value the unseen, the careful, and the kind. The story of the human and the dragon hatchling became legend, not because of battles or fire, but because of patience, trust, and the power of small, unnoticed kindnesses. The empire never forgot.